So Susy, take it away.
It's so funny hearing all that, my life bundled up into one paragraph. But I kind of want to go back to that. It would be at least 20 years ago that Mark and Mary came and led our church camp. It was up at Tuggerah Lakes a long time ago. I have a 26-year-old and a 24-year-old sons, and they were very little. I think even one of those years, I was pregnant, so it was a long time ago. But I remember you getting us in the big hall into two big concentric circles. The chairs in the middle were facing outwards, and the chairs on the outside were facing inwards. And this was an intergenerational event. So we had old men, young kids, everybody all in together. And we'd never as a church done that before. And I remember watching my 5-year-old, we would have to get up and move one chair along after every couple of minutes. And we'd have maybe one icebreaker question to do, and then we'd get up and talk to the next person. And I remember seeing my son, Doug knows TJ, talking to Graham Smith, who's Doug's friend. And that had never happened before. They'd never had a conversation. And I thought, well, how's it going to go? TJ was chatting away, and he's a quiet boy. I was like, oh my goodness, this was so wonderful. So first of all, thank you so much, Mark and Mary, because that really started me on a journey, I think. I then went to work for the Baptist Association doing children's ministry. And it was at a time when children's ministry was starting to change over to understand that the parents are really important in terms of discipling their children. Surprise, surprise. And that children are really important. Oh, surprise, surprise. That in fact, children are the ones that bring their friends to church. And, most 80% of people become Christians under the age of 18 or something. It's like, oh, children are important. And just going to a Sunday school is not going to be enough for them. So family ministry was born. That church's job was to equip and encourage parents to do a good job of raising their children. Now, I didn't grow up in the church, but I've watched my children grow up. We've been at the same church with Doug for 30 years, and it has been such a joy to watch my kids grow up in an intergenerational community and grow relationships with young people and adults that weren't negotiated by me. And it's made me think, churches are really good at families. And at a time when the church can be in the news for all sorts of terrible things, we should be shouting from the rooftops that, hey, one of the things that we could do to bless the world, to actually to bring the kingdom of God to the communities around us, is be involved with families. As Mark mentioned, I also worked for TIA. And at that time, we were looking at if we gave as much money as we could to make everybody in the world as well off as the average middle class Australian, well, we'd need 3 to 5 planets. So that wasn't going to be the solution. What the solution was going to be was to understand that we had enough. We, the wealthy, are the ones consuming and using up most of the resources in the world. So we need to find some place that we can say we have enough, that we can care about the environment and so on. And things are starting slowly to move along there as well. But I also studied peace and conflict, and I'm kind of going through the journey that I went on to bundle everything together in this book I've written. And I can summarize that entire master's degree for you and save you all of those essays, because whether we're talking about interpersonal relationships or international conflict, the theories are all exactly the same, because running nations is still just people, right? So the one tool that we have for conflict resolution is communication. And I don't mean talking at people, I mean learning to listen, learning to be empathetic, learning to listen deeply, learning to hold ourselves while we seek to understand another person's opinion. These are difficult things, but they are skills, and they are really the only skill that we have. Well, jump ahead, and for several years I ran a young adults Bible study group in my home, and I would have these gorgeous young people who are wanting to change the world say things to me like, why doesn't anyone teach us how to do conflict resolution? Why isn't anybody teaching us these basic skills of life? And then I saw this big research project that was done, that World Vision commissioned. And they interviewed, it's either 15,000 or 25,000, a lot of young people all around the world, many of whom who had left their church upbringing, their Christian upbringing, and they asked them why. And the things they said were, we really care about social justice. We really care about issues in the world. We care about the environment. We care about the poor, but we don't see the church caring about these things. In fact, what we see is all talk, no action, and quite a lot of hypocrisy. But what they found from these young people was they really wanted to be part of something bigger than them, with their friends, making a difference. The report's called the connected generation because they're very connected in terms of devices. But one of the overwhelming outcomes of this research was these people are lonely. These young people are lonely, and they want to be connected to real people. I've seen that myself. We're all worried about the effect of devices on our young people, and certainly with teenagers it's a real worry because they're not so good at managing themselves. But young adults are starting to step away and craving real connection. Well, when I put all this together, one more important realization was, if you've been involved with an organization like TIER or Baptist World Aid, or any organization, World Vision, that's doing community development, it occurred to me that we're supporting churches overseas that are reaching out into their local communities and helping them with the issues that local community is facing. Now, in their situation, it might be a lack of food, it might be oppression and so on. But here in our local communities as well, families are struggling with different issues. If we were to do community development in our local area, it might be to help families deal with devices, to deal with the overwhelming pressure of consumerism, to deal with domestic violence and some of the issues that are real in our lives. And it seems to me that to bring the kingdom of God from heaven to earth means to show how to live in ways that have good communication, that have care for children, that equips and encourages parents. And this can be so powerful because psychohistorians have done research on whole cultures by looking at the dominant child-rearing practice of any culture at a time. They can predict the social cohesion, the health of that culture in a generation's time. So, for example, they studied Nazi Germany. A generation earlier, you had really harsh authoritarian father figures, and so you end up with this whole generation of young boys craving some kind of father figure. Or the dreadful Balkan Wars. Why such violence? You go back a generation earlier and look at the dominant child-rearing practices, and you're not a real man unless you're beating your wife and kids. And violence is learnt behavior, so you get a violent culture later on. So my own personal way of changing the world is, if I can influence the dominant child-rearing practice in our culture to be one that prioritizes relationships, that is aware of the effect of our culture, that is able to recognize that we are spiritual beings. That means love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control. If we are people that are able to understand that our work here in this life is to contribute to the world rather than to be passive observers of it, if we can encourage families to raise kids who understand those things, then the world will be a better place, right? Then the kingdom of heaven will be on earth. So who's with me? The way that I've gone about this is to write this book. And what I've done with the book is it's kind of in two parts. It's talking to the parents, encouraging them with a lot of all that stuff that I just said. But I've also divided it into 4 parts. The first part, you can be no use to the world unless you are someone who has good, loving relationships. So the first part looks at relationships in the family, listening skills, conflict resolution skills, forgiveness skills, how we can deal with these. And the way that I thought we could best get families to learn these skills was to have conversations together. So I've got conversations in the book that are themed and structured in the same structure for each conversation as if you're going on a family trip. So all of the information that a family would need to have a conversation about forgiveness or listening or whatever is there ready for them. And I've actually suggested that the kids lead the conversations so that it's like this level playing field. It's not parents, you have to teach your kids, because actually I think kids are better at some of this stuff than the parents are. But it's we are learning this together. We're going to have a conversation about these things. So there are 10 conversations for relationship skills. Then there are 10 conversations for being aware of the effect our culture is having on us. There was an MP recently that wanted to bring in legislation to put restrictions on porn, which seemed like a great thing to do. But there was a lady, Carol Ronkin, who headed up a child protection organization, and she said, well, it won't work. It isn't enough. What we need to do is preventative work, teaching kids how to have positive relationships and teaching them how to be critical consumers of what they're seeing online. And I'm like, oh, that's exactly what I'm doing in my book. So the second section is there's conversations to have about porn, about how to talk about the difficult tech stuff. And we know that parents are just as stuck on their tech stuff as the kids are. So it's a way for families to have a conversation together about those things. Then the third set of conversations is about character or soul or spirit or our inner selves, I've called it, because I've written this book to be totally accessible to people who are outside Christian jargon. There's no Christian jargon in it. I mentioned my own faith and my own church, but this is a book that could easily be given to anybody who's not part of a Christian setting. But nevertheless, every single person has a spirit. And so I encourage them to think about what is that? And so there's a conversation on generosity. There's one on wisdom, one on purpose. And then the fourth set of conversations is about world issues. So there's one on poverty, there's one on seeking asylum, there's one on climate change. And my idea there is, if we watch the news, we are overwhelmed with all the terrible things that are happening in the world. But our brains are only really evolved to manage the size of a village, 100 or 150 people. And if we live in a village and Mrs. Jones's house burns down, we can help her. We can make a casserole, we can take her in, we can help her rebuild her house. And that's good for us to respond. It's especially good for children to build a worldview that, oh, there's a problem in the world. I can do something to help with that. Rather than, if you watch the news all the time, it's like, oh, all these terrible things, and oh, it makes me feel bad and I can't do anything about it. I just want to watch Netflix, which is what our culture is doing, isn't it? And so I really want to encourage parents to find out what their kids care about, to talk to their kids about what they care about, and work out together how they can do something to make the world a better place. Each conversation is action oriented, that at the end is think of something that you can do as a result. My 15 minutes is up. Of course, I could talk about this forever and a day. I have a website, and you can go and have a look at a couple of sample conversations to get the idea. I'm aware that you kind of have to see it to understand it. And I'm also aware that families really need to try it, to experience it. I'm a big fan of that experiential learning that Mark and Mary exposed me to all those years ago. But the feedback I'm starting to get from families is when they do have those conversations, whether their kids are very little or teenagers or young adults, they are being amazed. And that's making all that hard work worthwhile, because it's very hard to write a book. So I'll stop talking at that point.
Thank you. I know once you get on to your own topic, it's hard to stop at 15 minutes. We have time, plenty of time here to ask questions. Maybe Susy said something that you want to pick up on from your own experience. I would just ask you, because we have some new people on today, and people from all over the country, if you would just introduce yourself and say where you're zooming in from. But this is your time to either comment on what Susy has said or ask Susy a question. So the floor is open.
I'll start off saying, Susy, thank you for writing the book. I do wish I had it, because the discussion topics are fantastic for, starting not just kids, but us all thinking about how we relate to those things and how we can do something. So thank you. I appreciate it. I want to send it to lots of people. There you go.
Do it. I'm still in debt.
Did you self-publish?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Well done.
Yep. It was a steep learning curve. I did it because I didn't have enough faith in myself at the beginning that anyone, any publisher would want to do it. And maybe I wasn't even really sure of what it was going to turn out to be. And it wasn't till Mike Frost actually said, oh, you need to ask really famous people to read it and endorse it. And then I started getting messages back from Tim Costello and Steve Biddulph and Hugh Mackay and people I respected saying, this is really good. It's like, oh, okay, maybe I do need to, promote this book.
Maybe you need to tell us all how, if they haven't already gotten a copy, how they can get a copy.
It's on all the sites like Amazon and Booktopia and so on. And but actually the fastest way and the most helpful to me is if you buy it from my website. So on my website, there are links to all those places that you could buy it. Coorong's got it as well. In fact, I just found out today that Coorong just ordered 72 copies. So like, wow. But you can, if you buy it on my website, I will hand post it to you the next day. I'm just writing in the chat my website. There you go. Right, it's just raisingkidswhocare.info.
Susy, I bought a few extra ones to give away to some of my swim group who are not part of a religious association or a church or anything of that ilk. And I really value the fact that you haven't used religious language. I think that's good. It communicates, it's understood. These parents are really appreciative of the fact that someone's made the effort to engage their kids in conversation, inviting the kids to lead the conversation. And I think that's quite unique because it's coming from the bottom up rather than the top down. I guess my question is, there are some kids who just don't really want to engage. And I wonder how you begin that conversation.
My brother said he bribed his children because I was begging. I needed some family to test it out. And his kids are 14 and 16, and they weren't anti doing it, but they were busy doing their own life stuff. So I don't know how, but he bribed them, and they ended up talking for 2 hours. What I've heard from people is that it's hard to encourage the kids into it initially, but once they do, there's no problem. There's a little video that I put on my website where I say, oh, this is how you use the book. And then I say, actually, parents, I want you to step away. I want to just talk to the kids. And I say to the kids, actually, your parents are going to really need you to have these conversations, because they're just actually not as creative as you. They're busy and distracted, and you understand these things better than they do. So I really need you to try and kind of encourage them along. And I've had a couple of families who laughed at me, and there's like a 10-year-old girl, and her dad has said, oh, let's do this conversation. And he said something, and she said, how do you know that? You weren't supposed to be listening. And I just texted him out of the blue the other day about something, and he said, oh, that's amazing. We just put your book down. We were having a conversation. So just, there are so many things as parents that we have to encourage our kids to do when they don't necessarily want to. But my encouragement is, once you get started, it seems to be working. And that trick of getting the kids to lead it, like get them to choose which conversation they want to start, I'm hoping is going to be a bit more engaging.
I was thinking for many of us in our demographic, we might have missed the boat for our kids, but our grandkids, I guess, are still coming into that age where they too could be involved in that conversation. And it would be great, as you mentioned right at the beginning, you learned a lot from the camp that Mark and Mary led for our church, which is very multi-generational. I think this book lends itself to having 3 generations, grandparents, their offspring, and the grandkids all participating. So it then becomes a much more communal exercise. I think that would be great too.
Yeah, I've talked about families because that's kind of common, but it could be one adult, one child. It could be, a group of children. It could be a youth group. Of course, it could be grandchildren. It could be all sorts of things. And I hope that eventually it will be all of those things. It's not rocket science. It's just structured conversations to help. And they don't have the answers. They just get you having the conversations.
Yeah, particularly as grandparents are more and more involved in raising their grandchildren. So they're also key conversation partners in this. Other questions or comments?
Yeah, just it's very exciting what you're telling us. I'm just wondering, do you feel the book will stand in itself and people just able to read it and then run with it, or do you feel there should be workshops or train the trainer type? Yeah. So how do we implement something like?
I feel like I'd like Mark or Mary or Doug to answer that. Do you feel after reading the book that you could pick up and run with it, or maybe you guys are a bit extraordinary, but that absolutely is my intention, that you could pick up and run with it.
Yeah, it's a very hands-on book. It's not a book you sit and read from cover to cover. It's one which I think you pick a chapter and then you try and apply it, and because there are so many practical tips and ways to kick the ball off, and you never know which way the ball is going to bounce or go. So, and I think that's exciting. It's a springboard for conversation as much as anything. And so I think, Bruce, yeah, I haven't actually read it from cover to cover because I keep stopping and putting it down and thinking I must engage with that chapter and work it through.
Certainly, Bruce, what I've found is I've started being contacted by churches asking me to come and speak about the book. And what what I suggest is, okay, I'll come and I'll do and at the moment it's just Zoom, I'll do a family thing. So I did it for our church. We had an intergenerational church service, and literally all we did was one of the conversations. We went into breakout rooms. But some of the churches like, oh, I think that's a bit wild. We better just have the parents first. So I'll do a parents' night and then explain what it's all about. And then they'll say, oh, and then we'll do a family thing. What I'm hoping now is to really encourage churches that this is a way for you to bless families in your local area, to be, put on an event. It can just be fun, where you just invite a whole lot of families and, play a game, have some sausage rolls, and then sit in groups and have a conversation. So I have a million ideas of where this could go. The extreme end is this idea I've got for the Justice Games, which literally is events that churches can put on, where you do have an all-in experiential game, and then you go and have a family conversation. So I'm exploring lots of things, but I have lots of ideas of the ways that churches could use this book in their communities. For example, many churches have a whole heap of young families come to play groups, and they have waiting lists. They love it. And then the kids go to school, and they, after 5 years of building relationships, they say, okay, you graduated, bye. I'm like, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you say, okay, now you've graduated into our family program, and once a term, we're going to have this family fun night where you come and, each one night we'll learn about listening skills, and another night we'll learn about poverty, and another night, so yeah, I have more ideas for this than I have energy for.
It sounds though in the current climate, you'll have to design a Zoom model.
I know, so I'm working on that as well. That maybe something I could do is actually do like a course where I Zoom facilitate the conversations and say, okay, now stop now and answer this question, something like that, for people who, just to make it more accessible for people that aren't reading or whatever.
I would think with parents having to homeschool their kids, that they would be more apt than maybe in the past, where kids get to 5 or whatever age and you just send them off, and now that the parents, whether they like it or not, have to be more involved. And here is something that you can say, well, rather than just taking the school curriculum and having to work through it, try this with your family.
Yeah.
Or I was just thinking, since there are breakout rooms available with Zoom, start the conversation, break them up into families. Now go talk to your family and come back in 15 minutes or 20 minutes, or whatever. And then, talk about what you heard and then go back again. I just see so many, even with Zoom and COVID, we could still, do that kind of thing, getting people to talk to each other.
And it's almost a safer environment because, families might want, they can still have that sort of privacy for the conversation.
Yeah, you just get worried when they don't come back after the break.
Hopefully, because they're so busy talking.
Hopefully. Yeah. I was going to say that the comment that you made fairly early on, referring to some research that had been done regarding, the parenting style of, a previous generation and the impact that it has on the coming one. I think that's particularly telling, I guess, these days. And, because I've been thinking about, what we're going through with this COVID stuff, the impact of what's going on in families because of that, the repercussions or consequences, whether, it's positive or negative, will be carrying on for generations. And as Doug mentioned, some of us are grandparents. And actually this afternoon, particularly just before this, that's why I was a bit kind of late coming on, is that I had a call from my daughter and I didn't really want to cut short because she's, in Sydney in lockdown, with the husband, being professionals and then, doing the e-learning thing with the theatrical 7-year-old. And she'd been talking to my son, who's very close in age to that, and they have 2 little ones, and they're in that same boat. And I think something like this is particularly helpful because they're really going through the realities of what the restrictions mean, how lives have changed to what they were before. And I think it's different in different socioeconomic brackets. I mean, they're pretty comfortable and well off, but the thing is that because of that, it's like they have access to resources and stuff that a lot of other people probably don't, but the issues are still the same, so it doesn't really matter. It's about the conversations, and a lot of kids have got cabin fever and parents have got cabin fever scenarios. So to have these conversations, I think, can really break through on significant areas. So I guess with the conversations that you have in the book, are there age groups for these discussions? Because in a sense, my grandchildren are only like 7-year-olds or younger, whereas I can see with ones that are older or teenagers, you might be able to get, but you can still do it with younger children, of course. So can you comment a little bit about that in your book, if you've thought of different age groups relating to?
On the back, I've said that it's sort of aimed at 8 to 18 plus. So, and 8 is a bit of a, just an age that they could read it. So the parts where I've written to parents, so, they're references and it's a bit academic, but the conversations, the language is simple enough for a child to be able to read it. There's no reason that a younger one couldn't do it. They just, may not be able to read it. It might be the parents that are reading it. And parents, they can adjust it accordingly. So I haven't made it, this is just for this age, because I've already been told that, 8-year-olds are doing it, teenagers are doing it, young adults are doing it with their parents as well. These are issues that are important to all of us, across the ages. So no, I've left it to the parents and the kids themselves to do the age appropriateness. I'm interested, Mark and Mary, do you think I'm right in that? Do you think that it's fair enough?
I think that if the parents are able to just read it to children, I think 5-year-olds can deal with this stuff. I mean, they're still aware of what's going on with their peers, with their mom and dad, with other things, and what they see on TV, what they see on. There's just so many other things that are influencing quite young children. I see no reason why you couldn't use it with preschoolers. Yeah,
I actually think that too. I had these conversations with my kids when they were little. I mean, my son was 4 when 9/11 happened, and we had to explain it to him because there it was on the TV.
Yeah, some preschoolers are better at technology than I am, so you can have all kinds of conversations. Well, thank you very much, Susy, and I would encourage people to write and get the book. Even if not for yourself, I'm sure there's somebody in your family that needs something like this as a Christmas present. And I know several people who have self-published books and ended up with cartons and cartons in their garage. So you can help out Susy by buying some of those books and getting them out there. I was thinking, for me, it's almost like a workbook. It is not one that you just sit down and read. It is one that you work through, and valuable in that sense.
So maybe we'll call it a playbook, not a workbook.
Playbook, that gets into sports. It sounds like a playbook. Yes, very practical. And I think that the subtitle is Practical Conversations, and that would be my review of it. It is a very practical book. So thank you, Susy.